When the yacht was sinking and only one spot was left on the lifeboat, Hendrik Zuckerman chose me. I was rescued, but Jana Bridgeton didn't make it. Hendrix pretended not to care and went through with our wedding as planned. For 5 years after our marriage, he trampled me into the dirt, blaming me for Jana's death. When I couldn't take it any longer and wanted a divorce, he decided to die with me. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day the yacht accident happened. This time, I decided to give the chance to survive to the one he loves most. Yvonne, get in! When I realized I was given a second chance, our yacht had already started taking on water. The lifeboat could only hold 2 people. Of the 3 of us, only Hendrix knew how to operate it. So one of the spots had to go to him. There were 2 left fighting for the spot. After a fierce internal struggle, Hendrix finally extended his hand toward me. However, I took a step back, rejecting his offer. Hendrix, save Jana! I would never carry the weight of someone's death on my shoulders again. Upon hearing this, Hendrix seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Even his furrowed brows relaxed. Without hesitation, he grabbed Jana's hand and guided her to the lifeboat. Yvonne, you're my fiance. I would have chosen you, but you insisted that I take Jana. Stay put. I'll definitely come back for you. With that, he left with Jana, not sparing me another glance as if afraid I might change my mind. How ridiculous. Did he think everyone was like him? The last life played out similarly. He took me away from the disaster zone first, leaving Jana all alone on the yacht. Even though we contacted the Coast Guard as soon as we returned, Jana had drowned. All they recovered was her lifeless body. At first, Hendrix did not show any emotions when he heard the news. He calmly handled Jana's funeral and gave her family a large sum of money for their loss. The only request he made was to bury her in a pristine gravesite, supposedly with the best care. Naturally, I did not object and even thoughtfully asked if he wanted to postpone the wedding. However, he refused immediately. I still remember how he held my hand and said, "Yvonne, I'm definitely marrying you." It was not until later that I realized he was indeed determined to marry me. However, it was only so he could torment me, to make me atone for Jana's death for the rest of my life. What did her death have to do with me? As I watched them sail away, I immediately began thinking of ways to save myself. After all, I could not be sure if Hendrix would get help this time. In my previous life, it was because his beloved childhood friend was left behind that he rushed to get help as soon as we regained cell service. This time, his beloved was right by his side. Would he even remember me? Both times, the only person he ever truly wanted to save was his childhood sweetheart, Jana. I thought about it. They indeed had a great relationship. They grew up together, and no one could ever compare to the years she spent by his side. Even though he chose to save me, it was only because if he had saved Jana first, people would have criticized him for ignoring his fiancée. So, despite his love for Jana, he chose to rescue me. In the previous life, Hendrix deeply regretted that choice. Now, I had made that choice for him. He should be thanking me. It was not until their figures completely disappeared over the horizon that I quickly thought of ways to save myself. Although the yacht was taking on water, there were still many useful things on it. As I watched the rising water, I hurriedly went inside the yacht and found the swim rings and life jackets I had brought to the trip. I had prepared several swim rings in advance because I could not swim, but wanted to join in the fun. Now they were coming in handy. I hastily put on a life jacket, inflated the rings, and slipped one around my body. I then dug out the remaining few packets of chocolate and bottles of water. When the yacht finally sank completely, I took a deep breath and began swimming toward the shore. Although this was out at sea, it was not entirely desolate. Fishermen frequently passed by to fish, so I knew I would be saved if I could encounter a fishing boat. Unfortunately, it was the dead of night. Even if there were fishing boats nearby, the loud engine would likely drown out my cries for help. Despite that, I did not give up. I kept swimming toward the shore with all my strength. However, fate seemed to be out for me. The clear sky from earlier was now filled with thick, dark clouds. It played out just like my previous life. Shortly after, a torrential downpour began, making the rescue effort even harder and ultimately leading to Yana's death. Unlike her, I was not about to give up. I swam even harder. After about an hour of swimming, I finally saw a yacht drifting ahead, swaying in the water. I quickly raised my hands and shouted toward the yacht. "Help! Is anyone there? Please save me! Save me!" My voice grew louder as raindrops began falling from the sky. At first, I was hopeful, but within minutes the drizzle turned into a heavy downpour. I watched as the yacht drifted farther away and a sense of despair washed over me. Still, I did not give up, continuing to shout for help. "Somebody, please help me!" Just as I was about to lose hope, a figure appeared on the yacht. He shone a flashlight onto the water. He heard me! I was saved! A surge of immense joy filled my chest, and I immediately swam toward the beam of the flashlight. "Help! Please save me!" Using my last bit of strength, I finally reached the side of the yacht. A ladder was quickly lowered as I neared it. I nearly collapsed several times from exhaustion climbing up. The moment I stepped onto the yacht, my legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the deck. However, before my knees even touched the deck, a pair of strong hands caught me. "Are you all right?" I exhaled deeply and replied, "I'm fine, thank you." I leaned into his chest, my body completely drained from the ordeal. The man frowned as he glanced at me. Then, without another word, he scooped me up and carried me inside the yacht. He handed me a set of dry clothes and said, "You're soaking wet. Change into these." "Oh, thank you." Once he left the room, I hurriedly took off my soaked nightgown. Everything had happened so suddenly that I had not even had a chance to change. Just as I finished, there was a knock at the door. I walked over and opened it. The man entered, carrying a bowl of noodles, and placed it on the table, motioning for me to try it. That was when I finally got a good look at him. His facial features were sharp and defined, and he exuded an air of righteous strength, likely from being in the military. However, I was too hungry to think much about it. I wolfed down the bowl of noodles before speaking to him. "Hi, I'm Yvonne Lewis. Thank you so much for saving me." Andrew Grant glanced at my still damp hair and the faint scratches on my hands. "Let me dry your hair. Then I will take a look at that hand." I was puzzled. "Huh?" "The ocean isn't the cleanest place in the world. If you don't disinfect, the wounds could get infected." "Okay, thank you." After that, he draped a towel over my head and gently dried my hair. Then he carefully applied iodine to my wounds. I watched him, biting my lip as he dried my hair, feeling a sudden warmth in my heart. I remembered when Hendrix got drunk after we got married. I helped him back to the room and merely suggested he drink less. In response, he flew into a rage and shoved me to the ground, hard. I lost my balance, hitting the back of my head on the floor, and blood gushed out immediately. Gasping in pain, I stared at the blood on my hands and cried out. Hendrix just stood there, staring coldly at me. It hurts, doesn't it? When Yana died, I bet she was in 1,000 times more pain than you. But she's gone. If I hadn't been trying to save you back then, she never would have drowned. Yvonne, everything happened because of you, he said icily. I could only sit there, staring at him in utter disbelief and feeling the blood continue to pour from my head. My heart chilled, bit by bit, as I realized what he said. After a long silence, I finally spoke. "Hendrix, your rival sabotaged the yacht, and you're the one who told me to get on the lifeboat. And now you're blaming me? Don't you think that's utterly ridiculous?" The drunkenness faded from Hendrix's face, replaced by an even deeper indifference. "Yvonne, I never agreed to this marriage in the first place. If you hadn't told my grandmother you liked me, I wouldn't be forced to marry you." I laughed bitterly, looking at him like he was a joke. "So, you're saying all of this is my fault? Hendrix, you don't blame your enemies or your family's pressure, but instead you blame me. You're just pathetic." With that, I turned around and left, taking a cab to the hospital to deal with my injuries. From that moment on, our relationship hit rock bottom. And from that moment on, I never showed him any vulnerability again. However, now, here in the present, The stranger before me was afraid I might be in pain. He was so gentle and treated me with such care. My eyes stung suddenly, and I quickly turned away, taking a deep breath to hold back the tears. "Thank you," I said. Andrew raised his head, his smile pure and warm. "You're welcome." "Mr. Grant, are you in here?" A voice suddenly came from the door. A man in pajamas, wearing black-framed glasses, stood at the entrance. His eyes quickly landed on me after a brief glance at Andrew. "Sir, you called earlier about someone falling overboard. Is it this young lady here?" Andrew nodded and then turned to me. "He is the medic on board. He can give you a quick checkup to make sure you're okay." I nodded. Andrew quickly stepped aside, allowing Dr. Enfield to come in. He gave me a simple examination, and after asking me a few questions, concluded that I had no major injuries, just extreme fatigue from being in the water too long. Dr. Enfield stood up and turned to Andrew and said, "There aren't any serious injuries on Miss Lewis, but she's exhausted from drifting in the sea for too long. A good rest is all she needs." Andrew nodded, escorting Dr. Enfield to the door. They exchanged a few words in hushed tones. While they talked, I turned to the window. The rain had intensified and the sea was now completely obscured by darkness. I could not help but feel a small sense of relief. When Andrew returned, he said softly, "We are heading to land soon. Where do you live? I can take you home if you'd like." For some selfish reason, I suddenly did not want to go home. After all, my parents were rarely home, and even when they were, I hardly ever saw them. Besides, with how little they cared for me, I could be away for a month and they would not even notice. As for Hendrix, we both died together in our previous lives. Now that I was given a second chance, chances are he was too. He should be embracing Yana as we speak, cherishing this second chance at life with her. We were married for 5 years in our previous life. He never brought me to any social events, never slept in the same bed as me. He even took control of my family's business and cut me off. Whenever someone asked about me, he would sneer, turning me into the biggest joke in our circle. Now they can have their happily ever after. I glanced at Andrew and said, with a hint of pleading in my tone, "I don't have anywhere to go. Could you let me stay with you for a few days?" He did not respond immediately, so I tugged at his sleeve, looking at him with wide, pitiful eyes. If my memory serves me right, he was the youngest son of the Grant family and the only person who had helped me when I wanted a divorce in my last life. He has saved me twice now. He definitely was not a bad person. Seeing me look so pitiful, he suddenly lowered his head, his gaze intense. "I'm not a good man. Staying with me will come with a price." The sudden closeness made me dizzy. I could even smell the faint scent of mint on him. "Fine, whatever you want." "Are you sure?" "Of course," I responded firmly, and he suddenly smiled. However, the yacht arrived at shore because anything else could happen. I had been drifting at sea for so long that I was running a fever. As Andrew carried me off the yacht, a familiar voice rang out. "Yvonne, is that really you?" It was Hendrix. He had brought the police with him, likely to organize a search and rescue. When he saw me, Hendrix rushed over, his eyes filled with concern. "Yvonne, are you okay?" I stepped down from Andrew's arms, glared at him and answered, "Do I look like there's something wrong with me?"